I think being brave is like doing things that you're not comfortable with. Like, I really love the being outside your comfort zone and seeing how you grow and where it takes you. And I think no one likes being outside their comfort zone, and that's the point of it, that what you learn from being in that space and from certain experiences where you're uncomfortable is like makes you grow as a person. And I've learned so many things from being outside my comfort zone, and I'm grateful that I've pushed myself to do that. So I think like people who do that, like I see so many people do it on social media or my friends, and I'm like, wow, like that's incredible. Half the things I wouldn't do myself. So that's really inspiring and motivating, and I love that.
That was Amy McKinnon, and this is the Bravest Podcast. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Bravest Podcast. My name is Craig, and I'm your host. And if you've been listening to the show for a while, I appreciate you coming back for each episode. But if you're new to the podcast and this is your first time listening, thanks for being here. And I'm happy that you decided to join us on this journey of discovery, inspiration, and action that's really geared up to help us all create the healthiest version of ourselves, despite any obstacles that might fall across our path. Now, on this episode, we talk with Australian marathon runner and plant-based nutrition coach, Amy McKinnon. And as I'm recording this, I just learned that Amy just finished the Sydney Marathon, 6th in her age group, at a time of 3 hours, 23 minutes, and 31 seconds. So I just wanted to take a moment to extend a message of congratulations to Amy and let her know how super proud we all are of her. So great job, Amy. So Amy grew up in Sydney, Australia, and was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at a young age. And what's interesting about Amy's story is that her parents didn't try to slow her down in any way following that diagnosis. What they did accomplish, though, was to empower Amy and give her massive support as she took on the ultimate responsibilities for managing her diabetes as a child. Now, what you'll learn from this conversation is that those experiences early in life seemed to serve as Amy's guideposts as she started to take on larger challenges, including running marathons and solo travel adventures to different parts of the world. Now, during this conversation, Amy guides us through her experiences living with diabetes in Australia, as well as a rebellious stage that negatively impacted her diabetes control at one point in her life. Now, ultimately, a move halfway around the world to New York City served as an escape for Amy, as well as a rebirth of sorts, when she decided to craft a new life for herself that included healthier habits, a lifestyle of well-being, and a newfound passion for running. Now, Amy's move to New York City also solidified her commitment to a plant-based diet, which we talk a lot about in the podcast. Now, in our conversation, Amy describes how she launched her running career and what kept her motivated to run longer and longer distances and longer races over time. She also shares how she was able to successfully test her blood sugars while keeping her running pace during her very first marathon, which was the New York City Marathon. And she also talks about other lessons learned while training and running for those races. So we finish up the show by covering a very interesting project where Amy ran 40 half-marathon distance runs in a year's time. Now, most of those runs were completed while she was backpacking for 6 months through Central and South America. And she shares the lessons that she learned along the way and the challenges of managing type 1 diabetes while she was on the road. Now, this is a conversation of independence, of inner strength, mindset, and ultimately living life to the fullest. Now, for any of you looking for insights on running with type 1 or inspiration to simply keep putting one foot in front of the other, this is a super informative episode, and I know you're going to enjoy it. And speaking of simply putting one foot in front of the other and overcoming obstacles that might fall across our path, this episode is brought to you by the new apparel company with a big purpose called Greater Than. Earlier this year, Jen and Stephen Kramer learned that their 6-year-old son had type 1 diabetes. And although the diagnosis was clearly a shock to them, their hearts told them they needed to do something to make a positive impact on the world. They felt that they needed to use their new experiences to help others feel as though they had power despite the challenges they might face. So they created and launched the apparel company Greater Than. Now, Greater Than is a lifestyle brand dedicated to empowering all individuals. Jen and Stephen believe, and they want you to believe, that whatever your challenge might be, that you're definitely greater than that challenge. Now, because of the personal impact resulting from the recent diagnosis of their son, the first campaign focuses on the Type 1 community and is branded Greater Than 1. So the cool thing about all this is that not only are they designing an apparel line, which includes baseball hats and t-shirts that all look amazing, but with every single purchase of Greater Than products, a portion of each sale will be donated directly to Type 1 diabetes research and support. Now, guess what? If you go to their website, which is www.imgreaterthan.com, and you place your order, and at checkout you use the code BRAVEST, you'll get 10% off your entire order just for saying you heard about them on the podcast. So once again, head on over to imgreaterthan.com, use the checkout code BRAVEST for 10% off your entire order. I love those guys. I've been talking about them for a little while. They're doing amazing things. So please support them. And you're also supporting Type 1 diabetes research and also support for people who might be diagnosed with Type 1 diabetes. Okay, all that said, this is my conversation with Amy McKinnon.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right. So Amy McKinnon, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you kind of coming on, and you're all the way around the other side of the globe from me right now. You're in Australia, and I'm way on the other side in New York. So we made it happen with all the time zones.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So as I said, I know it's really early in the morning, and I have so much that I want to ask you because your story is really interesting, but the way you're living your life, to me, from what I understand, is really the most interesting part, because it kind of speaks to the exact reason why I started this podcast in the first place, was exactly how you're living your life. So I can't wait to kind of share all the details and kind of get into it. And we won't get too personal, I promise, but I'm really interested in a lot of stuff.
That's fine. You can ask questions. Go for it.
Cool. So, it's really interesting to me because outside of the United States, one of the largest kind of populations that are listening to the show happens to be in Australia and New Zealand as well.
That's cool.
Which is really cool. Yeah, which is really cool. I'll give you all the credit for that. I know that you're doing a lot of work for me down there.
I'll try my best. No promises.
Cool. So we've been communicating for a while. I've seen you all over the place online. You're a nutrition professional. You're in advertising. You're a dedicated runner, you're a writer, you're a world explorer, and I want to dive into all of that, but maybe we can really just start at the beginning of your story, really. You grew up in Sydney, Australia, right?
Yeah, yep. I pretty much lived here all my life with a little stint in New York, which we can talk about later.
Yep.
But yeah, my diagnosis story isn't too dramatic or anything like that. I was 12, so it was about 17 years ago, and I was just like a little bit sick. I was run down. I think I was like starting to lose weight, and my parents weren't sure what it was. So they tried to give you like nutritional supplements, which are just like the powdered form, which are just full of carbohydrates, not knowing why she's losing weight as a 12-year-old and like a bit sick. And I went to the doctor, and he basically said, oh, you should just take her to the emergency room. Went to the emergency room in the children's hospital, and the girl at the reception, I remember it, she looked at me and she said, oh, type 1 diabetes. Huh. And she knew straight away, presumably, I don't know what she saw in my face, but she was right. And then at that time, they kept you in hospital for a few days. And then that was a blur. Came out of hospital and went home. And my parents pretty much let me do everything from day one.
They didn't hold you back, which is probably the most important thing, is that they didn't limit you in any way.
So important. Like, now that I look back, I'm super grateful. Like, they never did my injections. Back then there was no CGM or no insulin pump. So it was like They didn't test my sugar levels overnight. They just were like, they'd give me as much support as I needed, but at the same time, they were like, okay, well, you're the one who has to live with it, so you've got to do your best to manage it, and we'll provide you support as you go, but you've got to be the one to take control, which I'm super grateful for now, looking back. So,
Sure.
yeah.
I'm just curious, are you an only child or do you have brothers and sisters?
No, I have a younger sister. Yeah.
So you're the older. Okay. So
Yeah.
anybody in your family have anything to do with diabetes? Any friends, family members that you know of that were type 1?
No, no one in my family. So I'm like the first one, hopefully the only one, to come out with type 1 diabetes. But during school, there were a few girls in school. I was the first one in high school to get type 1, and then there were maybe 3 or 4 younger girls after me. And then I had no direct friends, but back then, I think too, like social media, I didn't have Facebook till I was in university. So like interacting with people with type 1 was very limited to certain situations. If you have to go in the hospital for a checkup and there were other people there, you'd maybe say hi to them, or the girls at school, you'd speak to them if they like needed sugar, if they had low sugar levels. But yeah, there wasn't anyone really who I was close with type 1.
It's kind of interesting how social media and just the internet in general has really kind of shrunk the world down, and everyone who is dealing with a very specific type of a condition, a disorder, autoimmune disease, whatever you want to call it, has the ability to find an instant community really quickly and support. And what I've found is that once you enter into that community, most people are so welcoming, and all of a sudden you just feel like you've just been part of it for years. So it's a different world now than when you were diagnosed, I'm sure. Yeah. So
Totally.
It's really interesting how independent your parents made you at such an early age with your care for your diabetes, which we're going to talk a lot actually about some of the things that you were doing as an adult that that's telling of your personality. So we're going to dive into that in a moment, but let's talk a little bit about what you were like as a kid. Were you kind of a rambunctious kid? Were you into sports? What were you like as a kid?
I was quiet. I was very shy in situations, and I still am a little bit around people who I don't know. I was into sport, but nothing like crazy. I played tennis. I was good at swimming. In Australia, your parents make you swim from the day you're born, so we're good at swimming. I never really got into just school sports that you play at school. But yeah, I don't know anything like particular. Like my dad did say to me, like I've asked him as an adult, like with my management, what was his approach? And he just said, yeah, just to give me the responsibility in a way that I would manage it myself from the start. And I did typical things as a child, like I would write in my handwritten diary fake numbers, wrong sugar levels. So it was a perfect 90 probably every day leading up to my endocrinologist appointment, and they know that was wrong. And I'd get caught out and in trouble a few times. But my A1C was always between like 7 and 8. It never went above 8, which is, I feel like, pretty good for a teenager growing up. But I never rebelled. I have a lot of friends now who said like they rebelled during their teenage years, a bit of diabetes denial, but I never experienced that. So I find that a challenge to relate to when people try to ask me, oh, what did you do in this situation? I'm like, I didn't really go through that. I didn't have any rebellious stage. So it's hard for me to relate.
Well, I don't know if I want to call you out on that, because what I've read online is that you did have a rebellious stage, but it happened later in life, right? It wasn't necessarily in your teenage years.
Yes, in my early 20s, but I don't know if that was against my diabetes. It could have been when I used to go out clubbing a lot and having a few too many drinks, and that would affect my diabetes. There's no question there. But then I think my diabetes educator at the time would always say to me, you're great during the week. If you look at your sugar levels during the week, they're on point. Then you look at the weekend and it's like a storm hit or something. And I was like, yeah. And I could never get my A1C below 7. And she was like, if you just slow down on the drinking on the weekend and the party until 3 a.m., that might make a difference. And it took me a couple more years to realize that she was right there.
Was that just you kind of coming into your young adulthood, or do you think a part of that might have been burnout from kind of managing the day to day for many years at that point?
I wouldn't like, if I look back and reflect, it was like the group of friends that I was hanging out with, working in advertising. They have a lot of social events and parties at any opportunity, and I think I just got caught up in that kind of going out, having fun, and just probably they're just not caring about anything really, which is probably diabetes inclusive. But I don't think it was solely related to that. I probably think it was just a combination of like, everyone else is doing it, I'm having fun, I don't care to some extent.
Sure.
Let's just do it. Yeah.
So at some point you picked up from Australia and you moved to New York. When did that happen?
Yeah, that was in 2013. So my cousin at the time lived in New York. She's now in Chicago, but I'd been over there and visited her a couple of times and went over for her wedding. And I was like, I'd really want to live in New York. Like, that would be really cool. So luckily the agency that I was working for here in advertising gave me some support and helped me to get a job over there. And then I moved in around August 2013 and just took 2 suitcases, didn't really know anyone there, got there and was like, okay, I've got to find an apartment, furnish that apartment, figure out how to get the subway everywhere. And yeah, it was such a fun experience. It was definitely challenging at times, especially trying to figure out insurance, because it's very different to Australia. But yeah, it was great, and I'm so glad that I did that. Ooh, my dog.
That's okay. So you lived in New York for a bunch of years and kind of worked through the advertising world and had the experience of entertaining clients on a regular basis, and your health was good, but probably not as good as you would have hoped for just because of the work life. Yeah. So
many improvements needed to
many
be
improvements.
made.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, we're all human there. But I guess
Yeah.
I guess the question is, what was the catalyst for you to kind of turn around and say, you know what I'm doing is not working for me? Where did the shift kind of come for you?
I think it was as I was leading up to moving to New York. So that process realistically took about 4 to 6 months from when I really was like, okay, I want to move, to when I actually moved. I was getting a bit of burnout of going out all the time and drinking 3 or 4 days a week. You get over that reasonably quickly. And I think I saw New York as an opportunity to escape. Like, I love my friends, but it was a way to get away and not have the peer pressure of going out all the time. And I could make decisions and make changes without feeling like anyone was going to judge me. So I was like, okay, this is my opportunity. When I get on that plane, I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to focus on running. I'd already started running a bit, but running with a hangover really sucks. And then I'd watched a couple of documentaries about being plant-based and vegan, and I'd already had that in my head. So that transition to that style of eating was already planted in my head. I just saw New York as like, I can start fresh and no one knows Amy in Sydney or is going to pressure me.
Sure.
Anyway.
Now, you mentioned that you watched a couple of documentaries. Which was there one in particular that really kind of flipped the switch for you?
Yeah, Forks Over Knives.
Yeah, I hear that quite a bit, actually.
I saw that. And now I've watched it again and it doesn't have the same impact. And I don't know if it's because I've seen the messages or heard the messages before, but the first time I watched that, I was like, oh my God, this all makes so much sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm an extreme person. Like, I'm not a person of moderation. So I'm one extreme or the other, I've noticed, with my habits. So when I saw that and could relate to that or to me, it made a lot of sense. I was like, okay, I need to do this.
So where did you start? Did you start with kind of the diet? Did you do it? You said extremes, and I have a tendency to be kind of fall on one extreme or the other also. When I go into something, it's usually 100% or nothing at all. So,
Yes.
so my question to you is, so did you see that movie and then all of a sudden you go into this thought process and then next day that's it? No more animal product? Or did this happen as a transition over time?
I went vegetarian first. I was pretty much vegetarian even before I saw the documentary Eating a Bit of Sushi. I was never like a huge fan of meat. I'd eat it occasionally, but I wouldn't seek it out or cook it at home. And then I saw that documentary and I pretty much, not the next day, but maybe over the next month, I was like fully vegan.
So it was a pretty quick transition for you.
Yeah, pretty quick. I was like, okay, just take it out of the fridge, just cut it out.
What did
and
you
don't
notice
eat
in
it.
terms of how you felt?
Or
did you?
I did. I lost like 10 pounds initially quite quickly. And I think that's just, that would, see the problem, well, not the problem, but I stopped drinking at the same time that
Sure.
I changed to a vegan diet. So that in parallel probably had multiple benefits. So yeah, I dropped originally about 10 pounds. I felt good, but at the same time, I think when you're new, a lot of people do this when they're new to a vegan diet, is think like, oh, where am I going to get my protein? So I was like eating quite a bit of tofu. I was having protein shakes for no reason. I was like coming home from work and having a protein shake. I'm like, why? And eating like still like vegan burgers, and nothing's wrong with that, but like my diet's evolved since then. And just kind of trying to navigate like what I can eat, what I can't eat, what's going to keep me interested in this food. And I never felt hungry or I never felt like I was lacking anything, but I definitely had more energy. Like I was like this, I feel good. Like I never felt crappy or low in energy or it was all positive, the experience that I remember.
Sure. Were you self-guided in terms of your nutritional decisions, or was there someone you were turning to? I don't even know. Look, I now I understand that clearly the vegan community, the vegetarian community around the world is clearly blossoming for a number of different reasons. But when you kind of made this transition, who were you turning to for information, for answers, especially as a type 1 diabetic who's trying to become vegan?
Yeah, so funnily enough, I was seeing a nutritionist before I was vegan. She was type 1 diabetic and vegan.
Wow, you hit the jackpot there. Wow.
I know, but at the time I wasn't even vegan, and she was in Sydney, and I remember her like giving me recipes with chicken, and now I'm like, how did she feel about that? And then I went to New York, and I obviously didn't continue speaking to her, but I was always like, that's so funny that I saw her. She must have had some subtle effect on my decision. And I looked on the internet a lot. I'm pretty sure at that stage there's Robbie Barbaro. I think you've interviewed him.
Yep, Robbie and Cyrus. They were on the show at the very beginning.
Yes, I know both of them. I connected through social media with them both. But I'm pretty sure at that stage I may have seen, and I didn't follow like the whole raw or the really high fruit diet, but I remember seeing like, wow, if he can eat all those carbohydrates with type 1 and have great control, like he was a standout. But I'm pretty sure there was a few other people who I took note from or researched.
Yeah, those guys have made a pretty amazing impact in terms of the mentality of folks who have diabetes around the world, and it goes completely against what we're taught early on is high protein, low carb to maintain your blood sugars. But it's and that makes absolute sense when you think about it. But then when you understand the science, as especially someone like Cyrus, who's a PhD and he's a really, really bright guy, and he breaks it down to the molecular level for you. And he says, well, this is the reason why you should not eat a diet that is high in animal fat. And
Yes.
as a type,
And then it makes a lot of sense.
and then it makes a lot of sense because, even as type 1s, we have to be concerned with our fat intake. And it's not just about type 2 being insulin resistant. We ourselves as type 1s can be insulin resistant as well. And it's interesting because over the past 3.5 months, I've had conversations with Cyrus a lot, and he's a big cheerleader for me. But over the past 3.5 months, I've actually changed my diet significantly, and I experiment quite a bit. And I have been plant-based for 3.5 months.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I at the beginning was freaking out because I'm like, oh my God, I'm not getting enough protein. And I'm
that's number one.
Yeah, I'm totally not protein deficient. I'm okay. So
That's good. That's good. But I was going to say a point on that. It is really funny how I've done experiments. You were saying you've done some like experiments yourself, but I have too with fat. Like people say to me, there's no way that fat will cause you insulin resistance. So I'll say, all right, let me eat some peanut butter, like a significant amount, not 1 tablespoon, but like, let me eat maybe like 4 or 5 tablespoons in one sitting and show you what insulin resistance is. And I think reducing fat makes you, and Cyrus has said this to me too, makes you more sensitive to fat. So because I've been doing it for a few years now, like reasonably low fat, if I eat 4 or 5 tablespoons of peanut butter, which is like a nightmare to me, only for my sugar levels, you will see I can inject a lot of insulin and it'll take 4 or 5 hours to actually have any effect on my blood sugar level.
So you are your own lab rat. You are doing your own experiments as well.
Occasionally. I have to, I feel like a lot of the time you have to do it to really figure out like what's going on, and you're going to get it wrong sometimes. But when you get it wrong, at least you can then hopefully next time get it right or get it a bit better.
There's no doubt. I recently had a conversation with Phil Gramm. I don't know if you know who Phil is, but Phil's over in Ireland, and he is a former competitive bodybuilder, type 1, personal trainer, coach, nutrition guy. He's really dialed in with his nutrition and fitness. And he's a big fan of the fact that, look, and he said this multiple times in our interview, everybody's body is different, and you have to figure out what works for you. And just because we kind of all fall under this umbrella of either type 1 or type 2 diabetics or whatever it might be, foods react differently in each one of our bodies. Insulin reacts differently in each one of our bodies. And then there's all these other variables that come together that we just can't explain, that make us the animal that we are, and the outcomes that we get. So I'm a big fan of experimentation, and the good thing is that we have immediate data to see if what we're doing is working or if it's not working. So
yeah, that's good. And I did a lot of research, and I did some study with like some of the plant-based doctors out there, like T. Colin Campbell and Caldwell Esselstyn. I actually went to the plant-based conference in Anaheim over there, and so I saw a lot, and they have a lot of studies and data which they've pulled from journals on showing like insulin resistance, and it's all in type 2 diabetic patients. So I've shown some people, and some of my clients are like type 2, and I'm like, it's the same for type 1, and it's even the same for people without diabetes. It's just on a different level, or it's on a different, our body reacts the same. It's just being displayed in a type 2 diabetic patient. But just because we're type 1 doesn't mean our body doesn't have the same reaction.
Sure. So let's shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about something that's really a big part of your makeup, which is running. Why'd you start running?
I started running, really, it was like nothing to do with my diabetes. I had a friend, and he wanted to run this fun run in Sydney, which is like a 14-kilometer, I don't know how many miles that is, but maybe 8-mile, 9-mile race. And so I would start running with him. He was a lot faster than me, and it really sucked, to be honest. And I was like, I hate running. This is horrible. And then I started running on my own, and that really changed things. I was like, okay, I can run at my own pace. This is enjoyable. I won a trip to San Francisco to run the Nike Women's Half Marathon.
Okay.
And that was right after I moved to New York. And then I ran that half marathon, and I was like, I enjoy this. Let's do it more often. And I kind of think it kept me focused. I like having a goal, and I like having something to train for or focus on, and running gives me that.
Sure.
And I really enjoy that.
I'm just looking at our screen here, and just for the listeners, we're doing this through Skype and through video, and I know my face froze on your side, I think. So
it did.
It's a really flattering picture there too. It's kind of me mid-sentence. So I promise you I'm still here. So
yeah, that's fine.
So what was it kind of about the running that really kind of got you stoked? Was it kind of the endorphins, or was it just, it's something completely different than what you were doing, when you were not living the healthiest life? What was it really about the running that got you to keep doing it?
I felt good. Like, the endorphins, definitely. The runner's high is a real thing. And that felt good. And I felt fit. Like, I really felt the fittest I'd ever felt in my life. The impact on my diabetes management was huge. Like, changing to a vegan diet really helped my insulin sensitivity. Then adding regular running 5 to 7 days a week on top of that was like, boom.
Sure.
Even better. So I really noticed an impact on my diabetes management. And I felt like the more I trained, the better I got. And I generally I'm selective in sports or activities I do. If I know I'm going to lose or be the last, I'm not going to do it. And running, I was middle to front of the pack. And it was like a nice feeling to be like, okay, I'm good at this, and if I really focus and train, I can do reasonably well. And I was like pushing I was like mostly doing 10K half marathons. And then I got into the New York City Marathon, and I was like, okay, this is going to be fun. And I thought I'd only do one marathon, and I'm doing my 5th coming up this Sunday. So
that's great. So New York City was your first full marathon. That was in 2015, right?
Yes. Yep. That's correct.
So talk to me about that experience. I ran the half when did I run it? In 2016 I ran it. So it was just a couple of months after you ran the full. And I ran the half too. That was you did?
Course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I made it. I finished it. I did it for charity. But let's talk about you. So you ran. That was your first full marathon. The experience of the New York City Marathon is unlike any other. Just from knowing what I know, living in New York City. So I actually read that throughout the marathon, you were actually testing your blood sugars while you were maintaining pace running the race, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. Especially at the time that you were finishing the race. So you were moving and you were testing your blood sugars.
Yeah, and I remember, and I had and I trained, and because at the time I didn't have a CGM, so during my training and my long runs, I would do the same. And on my runs, I could stop. Like, my long runs, that's fine, but I didn't. I just was like, okay, well, in the race, I don't want to stop, so why am I going to stop in training? So and I remember a couple of times I'd be like very strategic. So I had like a waist belt, and I'd take out the test strips and put one in my mouth, and then put the test strip container back in, take out my finger pricker, take out my meter. And then I'd look behind me, look in front of me, just to make sure I'm not going to bump into anyone while I'm looking that second while I put the blood on the test strip. So it was very strategic, but I managed to do it without dropping anything and I actually kept my sugar levels in really good control during the race. Afterwards, the adrenaline kills them, and they generally spike reasonably high. But during that race, I don't think I went above 180, and I didn't go below 70, I think, maybe a little bit lower. But yeah, I was pretty happy with that.
So that's pretty amazing. So the one thing that I think that a lot of people who are just starting to get involved in running or any sort of athletic endeavor with diabetes is the fear of going low when you're out there either training or when you're actually racing. So did that ever kind of pop across your mind when you're out there? Like, well, look, you're testing, you don't have a CGM, so you're not going to have every 5 minutes information about your blood glucose levels. You tested only 4 times during the course of a marathon, which is what, about 3 hours plus, right?
Yeah, 3 hours and 40 for New York. Yeah.
So are you thinking much about going low during that?
No, I have pretty good self-awareness of hypos. Also, training, like you have to make mistakes in training, and you've got to be okay, like stopping a 20-mile run at 10 miles and being like, okay, I'm out of low supplies. I probably should stop or go to the corner store or cut this run short. And be like okay with it rather than being like, oh my gosh, I can't run again. Like you've got to be like, what, like be angry or pissed off at the time. And I've had times I've like had a low in a run and like this sucks and I start crying, a little dramatic. But and then you're going to be like, okay, collect yourself. What can I do next time? Or what did I do this time? Did I have insulin on board? Okay, well that's probably not ideal. Did I not bring enough snacks with me? When did I go low? At the beginning of my run, at the middle of my run? You've got to really criticize what you did and see where you can improve. And next time it'll be better, but you may still make mistakes, and I've made mistakes during races. Brooklyn half marathon, I thought I was low, so I didn't even test my blood, ate some sugar, get to the finish line, and my sugar level was over 300. And I was like,
wow,
oh my God. I was like, one, that's why I was probably not feeling the best. And two, if I just tested, I probably would have been fine. And so it's, you learn lessons and it's okay. You've got to like accept that it's not going to go to plan all the time.
Of course. So if there's someone out there who's listening and they're managing type 1 and they've never run before, they're at the very beginning of kind of their running journey, are there like maybe 2 or 3 things that you might be able to share with them from your experience that would kind of help them start off properly and kind of be prepared and maybe learn from your experiences?
Yeah, definitely. I think testing your sugar level is key. Like if you don't test, if you have a CGM, that's great. You can track what happens with your sugars. But if you don't know your sugar level, you're not going to know when it changes or why it changes. Start off slow. Like I didn't go straight to a marathon. You got to start at 5K. And if you jog and walk, that's totally fine. You've got to do what you're comfortable with. And if you push yourself too soon, you're not going to enjoy it because you've got to build up. So start slow, test your blood. And if you do have highs during a run or you do have lows, don't be too harsh on yourself. It's just a learning lesson. If I went back through all my runs and you saw my sugar levels, all my runs, it'd be like a roller coaster. Like I still sometimes get it wrong, and that's okay. It's a learning lesson, and it's only for a temporary period, and you can always improve.
Yeah, it just amazes me in talking to you and people like Eric from Diabetes Sports Project, and how with these other, I was talking to Eric about his cross-country run from San Diego to New York City with the 9 other type 1s. And the thing that blows me away is that just without dealing with type 1, there are so many other variables that we have to contend with regarding running and nutrition and hydration and just making sure that we're physically intact for those types of long runs. But on top of that, you have the other layer of diabetes, and now you're monitoring your blood sugars. And yes, with CGM, it makes it much easier to kind of figure out where we're going, what we need to do, and how we need to treat, if at all. But before, when you're sticking strips in your mouth and you're testing every 4 times throughout the course of a marathon, it's pretty remarkable when you think about what you have to do.
It's true. But I sometimes feel like I'm glad that I had that, not an option, but that was my only choice, because it really makes you be in tune with your body and how you feel and detecting lows. And now you just look at your CGM, you pay less attention to how your body feels. Not that it's a bad thing, but yeah, it's a lot more convenient.
It's kind of interesting because there's parallels to when you were first diagnosed as that 12-year-old being given the ultimate responsibility of your own health, and how you had to face all those challenges very early on and learn from your mistakes. And then you just take that on and you translate that into, okay, training for marathons and running marathons. And you're still at that point learning from your mistakes. And it's all about mindset, right? It's all about how you view a situation. So let's talk about mindset for just a moment. I'm really curious, like, so when you're running that marathon or when you're out training and all of a sudden you kind of hit upon a challenge, you hit upon an obstacle, how are you working through that in your head? Could you walk me through, like, how are you viewing the obstacle? What are you doing to kind of figure out your way around it? What are you doing in terms of self-talk?
In terms of like an obstacle related to my diabetes, like say a low sugar level or something like that, or
well, let's say that
more a challenge with running.
Well, let's just say that you're out running, and something occurs when you're out running. It could be a low blood sugar, or you're without supplies, or whatever it might be. How are you overcoming those challenges? How are you thinking it through in your head? How are you going to kind of get your way around it?
Okay, that's a good question. I'll probably just go with a low blood sugar level, especially like lately during my marathon training. When I train, I have like low sugar levels in general in the afternoon, which is also around the time that I finish work and go for my evening runs. So I can be in the morning, if my sugar level is at 120, I can go for my run and I don't need to eat before my run and I'm fine. In the afternoon, if my sugar level's 145, it'll drop during my run. And many times I've been like, I'm going out, I'm fine, I'm 145. I always take supplies with me, but depending on how my sugar level wants to react, whether I have enough or not. So I've learned that I'm comfortable with like eating and running, and treating the hypo as I'm running. If it's super low and I need to stop, I will. But I just try to I don't know, it's a very internal dialogue with myself. So I will like literally have a conversation with myself. I'll say, okay, how low am I? Am I 50 or am I 70? Okay, if I'm 70, I can eat and keep running or have an energy gel and keep going and just maybe slow my pace a little and it'll pick up in 5 to 10 minutes and I'll be okay. If I'm lower than that, I'm like, okay, Amy, you're lower. You can stop your watch. It's fine. You can stand here for 5 minutes. And I do get a bit and many times I still do. I get frustrated with myself. I'm like, why didn't you eat more before you ran? Or why didn't you bring 3 gels instead of 2 or something? But I just look at it like the situation is what it is. If I've got my phone on me, I can always, worst thing comes to worst, call an Uber and get it back to where my stuff is, or I can go to the corner store. I always take my credit card with me, so I make sure that when I go on my runs that I'm prepared for a situation which rarely happens but is not ideal. So I think, and then that makes me feel more comfortable and I can say to myself, okay, I've got these options. Treat the hypo now, see how my sugars react. If they come back up, I'm good, I can keep running. If it continues to go downhill, which has happened before, but it's not on a regular occurrence, then I have other options that I can take. So I always try to think logically. You're always going to panic. I know, like having a low sugar level sucks and it's not a good feeling, but you got to just be prepared and then you're more likely going to make more rational decisions.
Yeah, I was definitely interested in that kind of that internal dialogue, because even when we're low, is the example that you used, oftentimes we're not thinking very rationally. We're thinking very fight or flight in that moment, and it's at the absolute end of the world, depending on where the number is at. So if we're at 60 and we're trending sharply down, the next thing that happens is we start to panic just a little bit.
Yeah. And I've panicked many times. I've been on some trail runs with my boyfriend, and he's had to deal with me crying. I'll be like, I have 1 gel left. What am I going to do? And it's like, he's very calm, which helps me. But I've been very irrational at times, and you just think, oh my God, I am in the middle of nowhere with 1 gel. Mind you, I've already 8 and 3 and my sugar levels start skyrocketing, but at the time you're panicking and it is a scary situation. But panicking, I've learned, doesn't help in
Sure.
any way.
Is this the guy that just ran the ultra marathon, the 100 miler?
Yeah, he just ran 100 miles. I'm not that crazy yet, so.
Of course he's not going to panic, because if you're running for 36 hours straight, you're pretty much not going to panic about much of anything. You pretty much have it under control, I'm guessing. So.
Yes, exactly. Very calm, compared to me sometimes.
That's funny. I have one more question about the running, because this is a project that that you're involved with. It's really interesting to me, and Cyrus is also involved in this also. It's called One Bloody Drop, which you guys have committed to running a certain amount of miles and half marathons each, correct?
Yeah, so Cyrus is a little behind. No pressure on him.
We'll call him out in this. I'll actually put this in the show notes, and I'll tag him in social media, so he'll have to pick up his mileage.
He will. He's in denial, and I'm not going to pick up the slack for him because I've already finished. It was 40 half marathons in just over a year, and I had the fun of doing that while I was traveling around Latin America in really high altitude. And then, I finished, earlier in the year in Sydney. And it was actually I didn't run it wasn't official half marathons. Paul, who lives in the UK, he ran official races, and he was the head of the group and started this whole movement and wanted to do it for his, to celebrate 40 years with type 1. So we just supported him and ran that distance, 40 equivalent half marathons, which was a lot of fun, but I don't really like that distance anymore.
That's funny, but that's a great reason to run 40 half marathons. It's a lot of half marathons in a year or so. How far, just out of curiosity, how far is Cyrus behind? No, I'm just kidding. You don't have to tell me.
Maybe 11.
Okay, that's not too bad. So you alluded to something else that's another kind of source sometimes of anxiety for those with type 1 is managing our health during travel. And this is something that it seems like you've had a little bit of wanderlust, right? You've done definitely a lot of traveling, and you spent, I think it was about 6 months or so on a solo trip through Central and South America at some point.
Yeah, I did. I left New York in what year are we now? End of 2015, early 2016, and I was traveling around Latin America. And I always wanted to go there, and I kept putting it off. And then I was like, Amy, you just got to do this. You've got to just go out there. And I was really fascinated by the culture, and some of the countries are so beautiful. So I was like, sold everything in my apartment in New York, packed one backpack, and then an extra bag for all my diabetes supplies for 6 months. And then, headed off. And it was pretty fun.
How did you get around? Did you take buses, planes, hitchhike? What was the mode of transportation?
I only hitchhiked once in Mexico. So mostly planes and buses. They were the main transport, which was going country to country was mostly flying, and then in each country buses. What border? I crossed from Mexico to Guatemala in a bus. Very relaxed security at the border. I didn't check anything. Look at your passport. That's about it. But then mostly buses within each country. Easy and cheap.
Were there any significant challenges that you faced from a healthcare perspective or a diet perspective when you were traveling around there?
A bit of both. I was, again, not on a CGM at the time, and I was testing my blood 20 plus times a day. I was and that was because my routine was no routine, and I was eating food that I normally wouldn't eat. Everything is cooked in oil over there. So I was testing a lot, and in Guatemala I had to buy test strips, and surprisingly they were expensive. I was the average Guatemalan could not be affording. I spent well over $150 on a few packets of test strips. And so that was fine. Like I had access, and there was medication if I needed it pretty much in all of the countries. Food wise, if I shopped on my own, fine, because you can go to the markets, they have fresh tropical fruit and vegetables and rice and beans, and it's great. I did, again, in Guatemala, maybe that wasn't my country, but I ate some vegetables that were washed in contaminated water, which is just their usual water, not bottled water. And I got a really bad stomach bug, and I was on 3 different antibiotics, was like sick for probably over a month, and yeah, it was just, that was the worst. And I did want to come home during that time, and thankfully my parents were like, just stick it out, you will be fine. And so I did, and continued on my trip.
Now, you just mentioned before that you also ran some of those half marathon distances while you were down in Central and South America too, right?
Yes, I did. That was fine. It was really fun because I got to see, in Ecuador, they have like a Nike run club over there, so I ran with them and met some people who then would run with me in over there and do it with me. So I had people to run with. The hardest was in La Paz in Bolivia, which off the top of my head I don't remember the altitude, but it's the highest altitude of a capital city in the world. And I did a half marathon there, won, and by the end I was like, I need an oxygen tank. Breathing is the hardest challenge, and it makes you feel so unfit. But it was a good way to see each of the cities. It was fun.
That sounds great. What if there's 1 or 2 things that you learned about yourself when you were traveling throughout? What were those things?
It's okay not to have a plan, and being outside your comfort zone, there are so many good things will happen.
Yeah, that's great advice right there for anybody. Just have to, everything that we want really lies outside of that comfort zone.
Oh, totally. And I was out of my comfort zone probably like 60-70% of the trip. But I wouldn't have done half the things that I did if I didn't just say, okay, get over it, Amy, and just do it anyway. And it was, incredible experiences.
That's so great. So is there anywhere on the planet that you haven't been yet that's kind of the ultimate destination for you?
That's such a hard question because there's so many places.
You can give me a few.
Maybe the next trip somewhere like Iceland would be cool to see like the Northern Lights. I think that would be incredible. Trying to organize that maybe for next year sometime. Even places that like the Grand Canyon, like, places that are reasonably popular, but like say running in the Grand Canyon would be like an incredible experience. I'd love to explore more of Latin America, go back. I didn't go to all the countries. But yeah, I'll stick with Iceland and the Grand Canyon.
Cool places. I haven't been to Iceland, but Desert Southwest and Grand Canyon area, I've definitely been there before. It's beautiful out there. Yeah, no doubt. Okay. So we touched a little bit on kind of your nutrition background at the beginning, and you're a plant-based nutrition coach, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I am.
So I'm interested. I asked this question a bunch, but I'm really interested to hear your opinion with your coach's hat on. And so as someone who's a coach, you probably work with people, all different types of people, different personalities, different needs, but they all need to be motivated in some way, right, to create and to sustain positive lifestyle changes. That's really the core mission of a coach, right, is to help people change lifestyle habits for the better. So do you think it's more important to be internally motivated or externally motivated, or do you think it's a combination of the two?
Definitely a combination of the two. I think there has to be some internal motivation. It cannot be all external. If you're looking for external motivation solely, you're relying on something else, and you can't rely on that something else to always be there to motivate you. So I think you can I even look for external things for motivation within myself, but for you to have success, in your own way, whatever that is, with healthy eating, changing your lifestyle, improving your diabetes management. There has to be like an internal drive or motivator that's going to, when things aren't going to plan or things really suck, that you have to turn to yourself and say, okay, it's going to get better. And that, I think, has to come internally to some extent. Yeah, can't be solely external.
Where do you look for that external motivation?
I look to it through friends. I look to it people with other people with type 1 who are doing great things. There's a few type 1 runners out there who are really doing great things. Stephen England, he lives in New York. He's one of them, running like 120-mile races and killing it. So people who I can relate to in some way, if it's my running, diabetes, a mix of both, like that's where I kind of look for external motivation.
Sure. What are some of the biggest challenges that, as you're coaching clients, what are some of the biggest challenges you face with them?
Getting them to be patient to see the results, and also if their sugar level, generally when you change from a relatively low carb, high fat diet to then a higher carb, lower fat diet, you're going to see some spikes in your sugar levels. You got to change your insulin doses, and I get them to go through a series of testing their basal and testing their insulin to carb ratio, and you're going to get it wrong a few times. And I tell them it's okay. Like, I get it wrong still sometimes today. Like, my sugar levels are not 90 all the time. I still go low, I still go high, and it's just, you're going to have to make those mistakes to see improvements. And that's the biggest challenge, is sometimes people struggle with, they panic, and I understand the panic of having a high sugar level. It's not a nice feeling, but if it's temporary and you can make an improvement from it, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
So patience and learning from your mistakes.
Yeah.
Really important. Cool. So what's next for you? You're running a marathon, you said, this weekend.
Yeah, Sydney. Hoping for good conditions. So pretty flat and fast course. So I'm looking, I ran it last year, and that's when I qualified for Boston. So I'm hoping if all goes well, I can run another fast 26 miles. And then after that, I'm thinking I'm going to try, no influence from my boyfriend, but to get into longer distances and just see how I go. Like, I feel like I'm not good on short distance. If you see my PR for a 10K, it's not that fast. So I think longer distances maybe I'm more suited to. I can keep pace consistent for a while. So it'll be a good challenge, and it'll be fun to see mentally how I can go running for a longer time.
That's great.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't have anything planned though after Sydney. I'm just going to see how my body recovers and then go from there.
Take it from there. Excellent.
Yeah.
So for anybody who's interested in learning more about you, where's the best place for them to connect with you online?
Okay, you can connect with me. There's a few places on my website, which is my name, amymckinnonnutrition.com. And that's where you can kind of, like, I write a blog there, and I post things on my running and healthy eating and some tips on there, and you can check that out. Social media, for my nutrition side, it's the same, Amy McKinnon Nutrition. My personal Instagram, which is basically just lots of running and photos of Sydney, is Amy LMCK. So yeah, you can find me on those media.
I'll make sure that all of that information is up on the show notes, so it's easy for everybody to find you. You're an excellent writer as well, because I've read a lot of your pieces about travel in particular, and traveling throughout Central South America. You did some great articles on that. Running, there's a lot of gems of knowledge in all the things that you're writing about. So congratulations on all that great work. Just a couple more final questions, then I'm going to let you go. I know that you probably want to get out running or something at this point, because it's that time of the morning.
Rest day, though. It's a rest day.
Oh, so it's a rest day. Good.
Timed it well. Yeah.
Gotcha. So what's the best piece of advice that anyone has ever given you?
Oh my God, you got me on the spot. That Best piece of advice. Oh, that's a tough one. I'd say probably don't stress about things that are out of your control. I used to stress about a lot of things that were not in my control, and it really gives you like freedom, not only like freedom from being stressed, but it just gives you like clarity that everything will be okay. And if it's not in your control, there's no point getting worked up about it.
Excellent advice. So last question. I asked this question of every single person that I've interviewed, and I'm curious to know, what is your definition of the word brave?
Okay, I had a bit of a think about this one. I think being brave is like doing things that you're not comfortable with. Like, I really love the being outside your comfort zone and seeing how you grow and where it takes you. And I think no one likes being outside their comfort zone, and that's the point of it. That what you learn from being in that space and from certain experiences where you're uncomfortable is like makes you grow as a person. And I've learned so many things from being outside my comfort zone, and I'm grateful that I've pushed myself to do that. So I think like people who do that, like I see so many people do it on social media or my friends, and I'm like, wow, like that's incredible. And half the things I wouldn't do myself. So that's really inspiring and motivating, and I love that.
Cool. That was great. Amy, thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course. Look, I love how you're so passionate about living life to its fullest. And yes, you said you kind of like, you're quiet and you kind of like to just kind of keep to yourself and stuff like that. But it's clear that you are living outside of that comfort zone on a day-to-day basis. And you're definitely an inspiration. I hope this conversation motivates other people to drop their excuses if they have any, and just kind of get out there and take on life. And we don't get a second chance at this. So it's really kind of our opportunity just to get out there and listen to people like you who are doing amazing things. And that's the reason why I started this show in the first place, was to learn from people just like you. And I really appreciate you being here. And we definitely have to link up the next time you're in New York City.
Yeah, definitely. I'm on the West Coast quite a bit. But yeah, when I'm in the East Coast, I'll let you know and we can catch up.
Sounds awesome. Amy, thank you so much. Take care out there.
Thank you. Thanks, Craig.
And good luck.
Bye.
Good luck this weekend also.
Thank you.
All right, so there you have it. A lot of information there, and I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Amy McKinnon. You guys definitely need to check her out online, as well as follow her story on social media. So I'll be sure to include links to her website and where you can get in touch with Amy in the show notes for this particular episode. So head on over to thebravestlife.com/013 for all that information. Now, as always, I want to thank all of you for joining us for this episode of the show. If you like what we're doing here, please be sure to share this episode with someone you love. Again, the link for the episode is thebravestlife.com/013. Now, there's so much I'm working on in the background to help support you on this journey, and I'm excited to reveal some of those projects in the near future. But in the meantime, I appreciate all of your messages, and if you have any requests for future guests or topics, or you just want to say hello, please feel free to reach out to me through the contact page on the Bravest Life website. Okay, guys, don't forget to check Amy out online. Thanks again. I'm Craig, and we will catch you next time on the Bravest Podcast.